welcome. Appreciate so much you being here at this training on submitting a letter or editorial to your local newspaper, whether that newspaper is online or actual still in print, on the 14th anniversary of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision. Greg Coleridge here, Move to Amend co-director. Please feel free, again, if you haven't yet, to share who you are and where you're from in the chat. As mentioned, this program will last 1 hour. Even though we're starting minutes late, we'd like to ask you kindly to stick around for 4 minutes afterwards so that we can get jam everything in that we've time to do that in the hour. We're willing, however, to hang around afterwards if anyone has any additional questions. Please mute yourself now. Questions may be asked and will be asked later, either in the chat or verbally. You can do that by raising your hand physically or looking at the bottom of the screen. You will notice an icon that says reactions, and that is where, if you click on it, there's a way to put an iconic, as an icon, hand up. And there's a couple different opportunities for asking questions. All right, as you may know, Move to Amend formally was launched on the day of the Citizens United decision back in 2010, and that was January 21st. Our initial goal then, as it is now, however, is not simply to overturn that decision. Since the influence of money in elections and corporate rule over our elections, laws, and regulations at the national, state, and local level precedes Citizens United by decades, if not by more than a century. No other organization, as in none, is calling for what our We the People Amendment advocates: abolishing the constitutional doctrines that money equals free speech, and that a corporation is not a person, corporate personhood for short. The Citizens United decision, however, is an angle, a hook, an excuse, a reference point, an opportunity to make these larger points. We need, very importantly, to take advantage of such an opening at this very moment when more and more people across the political spectrum, and that is absolutely true, feel super rich and corporations have way too much power, are unaccountable, and threaten our lives and what is left of our natural world. So thank you for being willing to be here and explore using this opportunity and this a letter to the editor or opinion piece to your local news daily, weekly, or whenever it comes out. Some places, papers come out a couple times a week, every day. Our evening, as you can see in the chat, consists of Move to Amend Law and Research members reviewing information that we developed and answering questions to help you and or others in your affiliate or a group, any other group that you may be a part of, to craft and submit a letter or op-ed. Margaret Kester will address the letters to the editor part of this, John Fioretta, the op-ed piece of it. There'll be time for questions after each presentation, monitored and acknowledged by Cole Bennett. And then Jenny Spanos will then further discuss the website where the information we're going to be showing will be housed and how, with your help, we can coordinate submissions. So with that, let us begin with Margaret. This is when I'm going to share the screen, and hopefully and here we go.
Okay, so we prepared several samples. John did some and I did some, and then I included a couple that printed in the paper where I used to live quite a few years ago, just to give you an idea of people using their own voice, that they're all very different in tone and style. And that's a really important part of writing a letter, that it should be fairly conversational. Most word processing programs will give you a running word count. That's important because most papers have a word limit. And if you send in something too long that they decide to publish, they will do the editing. So you don't want that. You want to be the person who decides what's in and or not in your letter. So I'm not going to go over these in detail because they will be available on the website, but maybe we could just take a minute to scan them quickly. Are you moving? Greg is moving them up. One thing is, so we wrote these using Citizens United anniversary as a hook. And as Greg was talking, I see that I made an error in the two that I wrote. I was saying it was the 13th anniversary. Actually, it's the 14th anniversary, 2024. So we're referencing Citizens United because there will probably be a little article about that. There isn't, there should be. And then making one or two key points about the effects of Citizens United. We want to mention House Joint Resolution 54, the We the People Amendment, and also something like, for more information, go to movetoamend.org. If they don't want people putting website references in the letter, they'll take it out. So also look up, you can look under, now I can't remember, house.gov, I think is the website, and look up House Joint Resolution 54 and see whether or not
Congress.gov.
Congress.gov, thank you, Greg. And find out, there's a list of co-sponsors. It's usually fairly current. So you can see if you don't know already, if your congressperson is or is not a co-sponsor. And then we suggest that you mention that too. It's also the congressional offices keep track of letters to the editor, especially if their name is in it. So that's a really helpful way to get their attention. And also we hope that it will encourage people who are reading the newspaper, reading your letter, to be aware of their congressperson's position. So it's important not to just copy the sample letter. We're just putting them in as examples of how you could write a letter, particularly if it's possible or likely that more than one person will send the letter to the same newspaper, because if they get duplicates, or ones that look like boilerplate, they won't print them, and then your name will be mud. They won't be very interested in running anything about Move to Amend in the future. So to avoid that, of course, we encourage you to talk to each other, but also to send sample, particularly if it's a large urban newspaper, to send a sample to us, which Jenny will give the instructions for exactly the mailing address, the email address to send that to, so that we can just make sure that there are not duplicates. Also, we would like to know if your letter gets published, so please let us know that by sending a sample of the, sending a copy of the letter. I think, team, have I missed anything important here?
Well, I just wonder, we have two different documents we prepared. One is this sample document that you've just gone over that has a few, three different samples. But the other document that we have that'll be made available on the website are instructions and tips and the like. So I don't know if you want to say anything more. You have said a few things, Margaret, but anything more while we have it on the screen of the instructions or tips.
Right, and there are also talking points on the website. So if something's up in your community, some action by a corporation or some government entity or some issue that's current that could be tied to Move to Amend, it would be really good to check on the talking points and use those for hooks too. So we're just using these now, as a way to get started, but it's always helpful to just keep an eye on what's in the news and to send in letters whenever there's a hook. So is there a discussion about any of this? Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to say or point out?
Is there anything more just on these points that you want to say? How do you write a letter, or the do's and don'ts that you think is worthwhile lifting up?
Okay, here's something from Michael in the chat. Is it useful to include any facts and figures on how much money has been spent in 14 years for certain roles? A lot of ways to slice the data provided by Open Secrets, and I wonder about a point or two focused on any given races or roles or generally. I'd like to know what the impact has been on elections since the decision. Samples do include this. Hard to reading the fast scroll. Yeah, so John's letters in particular go into that in detail, and then even more detail in his sample op-ed. So you can certainly refer to that for information. And I think, letters to the editor, they may influence some people into thinking about something or changing their mind. They may alert some people to something that they hadn't known about before. And that's certainly one thing we hope that sending in a letter mentioning the We the People Amendment or move to amend.org will let some people know about something they didn't know about before. But it's also just a counting device. Your congressperson and other office holders will be keeping track of letters to the editor. The newspaper editors will be keeping track of letters to the editor, and that will help them know what might be newsworthy or something they might want to pay more attention to or run a story about. What date would you say is ideal for submission? So every newspaper on their website will have instructions for submitting a letter to the editor. So it will tell you the format, whether you can send it by email, the email address, the word count, any other rules that they have, and also the timeline. So larger papers usually will have a shorter timeline. Some newspapers are weekly, so you have to get it in a few days before their weekly publication date. The actual anniversary is January 20th or 21st. Am I right about that? 21st. So the actual anniversary when the Citizens United decision was announced was January 21st of 2010. So certainly in time for that issue would be good, or even, within that week, day or two before, a day or two after. Cole, I see you had a hand up.
You answered it. I wanted to raise up Jan's question.
Okay.
But I do want to open it up. If anybody else has any questions about letters to the editor specifically, now would be the time to do it. Or as we've already done a little bit, putting it in the chat also will work.
Maybe I need to stop for that to happen.
Margaret, could I jump in for just a second?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Through one of my other organizations, we were told, and this was by somebody who worked 30 years as an editorial editor on a major regional newspaper. And he said, the studies show that for every for every copy of the paper that goes out, 3 people read it. And the most read sections are sports, the comics, and letters to the editor. Okay. So now this may have changed over time, but when he was giving us this information, he said it's very powerful to get a letter to the editor published because it's not just one person. You're getting to 3 people for every letter to the editor that you do get published. And when you consider circulation of a couple 100,000 or even 50,000, the numbers ramp up rather quickly. Any rate,
yeah, and I think it's also a truism that if someone takes the time and puts in the effort to write an actual letter, You know, whether you send something by snail mail to your congressperson or send a letter to the editor, you know, you've taken some time, you've given it some thought, you've put in some effort. Clearly, it's important to you. And also, you're probably not the only person. You're the person who actually wrote the letter, but you're not the only person who has that opinion or feels strongly about that. So it really, there's a multiplier effect, I think, for sure. And your local elected officials will be tracking the letters to the editor too, not just your Congress people. And they're important for getting local support because the Congress people that we're asking to co-sponsor, they will want to know from people at the state and county and city level how things are going on the ground in the more granular way. So Mary Sue, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that in our paper, letters to the editor only come out once a week, usually. There just aren't nearly as many letters going into the paper, I don't think, as there used to be. And so, especially considering timing to have it published as close to the 21st as possible, you have to know also when that letter might be published during the week for the paper. So I think
Right.
every Saturday is when we see them there, so.
Right. And that information should be on the newspaper's letters to the editor page telling you how to submit a letter. So how much personal identification is expected? So they want it all. The editor wants it all. They want your name, address, phone number, email, but what will go in the paper is your name and your city. So they want to be able to contact you if they have questions. They want to verify that you're a real person. And they might want to verify that you live where you say you do, at least as far as in the jurisdictional area, but they don't publish addresses or phone numbers or emails.
Okay, do we have any more questions for Margaret about letters to the editor?
I'll
If you do,
just
they'll
make a
be
comment,
found-
just make a comment, put it in the chat that we have had congressional reps who have come on board to co-sponsor the We the People Amendment after a letter has been published in the local paper.
Jenny Stack. And having worked at a paper for a while, sometimes they plan in advance. So if they get a letter to the editor about Citizens United this week, then they'll put it in the cache to be printed for that time period. So you don't want to wait until the last minute because sometimes they already have filled some of the paper for that. It is very timely around Citizens United, so that's when they would put it in.
Okay. So Jan has a hand up. Jan?
She's muted.
You're muted, Jan.
Hi, Margaret. Nice to see you.
Hi.
So if you can't include your contact information in the letter, how do you, if people want to get in touch with you because they're interested in what you have to say, how does that happen?
I don't know. I imagine if you put in the letter that you are open to being contacted and your contact information, they would probably print it. In the submission form, they always want your name, address, and so on and so forth. And they'll usually tell you on the website that they don't print all of that, but they won't print it without it in their records. But then what actually goes in the paper is just your name and location. But if in the body of the letter you put something that you want people to know, I would imagine they'd print it. They might check with you to make sure that you're okay with it. But
Okay, great.
no, I
Thank
haven't
you.
had that experience.
They're also more likely to print something if the contact info is of a group. So if it's of your affiliate, here's your affiliate. Here's a phone number if you have, a landline that's not your personal. But so anything that's organizationally related, much better chance.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks, Greg.
Sandy, did you have a question?
I do. So in my area, it's Columbus, Ohio, And I'm wondering whether to mention my representative, who has thus far been very resistant to signing. But there's other representatives in the area too. I guess I'm wondering, should we name representatives? And if we do we just say, hey, call them, or do we mention that they have kind of put in something to explain that they have not been very helpful on this issue in the past? Just wondering if there's any ideas on that.
So what we did, John did the same thing in our sample letters. We just said, Representative so-and-so is a co-sponsor, and I thank them, and I hope you will too. Or a representative so-and-so is not a co-sponsor, and I encourage them to become one, and I hope you will too. If you want to criticize them, certainly you will see letters to the editor criticizing elected officials for positions or views. So you could do that. That's a strategic question, I think, based on your interactions with their office to date.
Okay.
But it has been pointed out that, when the staffers track letters to the editor, if the elected representative is mentioned by name, they will definitely make note of it.
Yes,
People used to I remember once I had a little job when I was a teenager of going through the local paper and cutting out every article that mentioned the Democratic Party or the local elected Democrat and putting them in a scrapbook. This was way, pre-internet, pre a lot of things, but they pay attention. Political parties pay attention, organizations pay attention, the offices of office holders pay attention. They want to keep their finger on the public pulse.
Thank you.
So if anybody has any more questions, we can address those now, or you can put them in the chat if we want to go ahead and move on, John, to op-eds.
Greg, could you put our training materials, not the letters, but the outline, or I refer to it more like a cheat sheet. And before we get to the op-ed part, why don't you just go back to the top of it for a second? There you go. Okay, so this starts off with letters to the editor, and Margaret has covered a lot of this. There is more information in here because she was trying to focus on more specific situations. So a lot of what applies to letters to the editor also applies to op-eds. Since you've got this in the training materials, I'm going to focus on the differences between letters to the editor and op-ed. And if you can scroll down to the op-ed part, please now, Greg. Okay, and yeah, there you go. Okay. Thanks again for being here. Op-eds are different for a variety of reasons, but one is they're less formulaic, and therefore I think there's a little more creativity to them, and they're also more work. And they're more work because they're longer. They're 650 to 850 words typically, or longer, depending on the newspaper. And also they require more research and knowledge of the issue. You can say a lot in 650 to 850 words, so you better know what you're talking about. I want to comment on what Mary Sue said a moment ago about there being fewer letters to the editor. That is also true of op-eds, and therefore it's more difficult to get published, and therefore you better have a better product. Now, who can submit an op-ed? Anybody can submit one, but whether or not you get published sometimes depends on whether or not you've got experience and expertise in the topic. And I know that in the time I have been volunteering with Move to Amend starting in 2012 and until now, my local newspaper, the San Jose Mercury News, changed it's policy. It used to be anybody could submit something, and if it was good enough, they would publish it. And now they specifically look for people who have a background or experience or expertise in an area. However, even if that's true for your paper, don't see that as a dead end or a stop sign. One way to get around this is to ghostwrite for an elected official. I think newspapers will very rarely turn down an elected official. Now, of course, you want to get permission from the elected official first and make sure they agree with what you want to say. But if you do that and then ghostwrite something for them, and then you have to work out who's going to actually do the submittal and that kind of thing, then that can be an effective way to get our message forward. And I think would be pretty straightforward if your or one of your members of Congress supported the We the People amendment already. Now, if you can't get one of your members of Congress to do that, then try for a community leader, somebody with positive name recognition. And then in that case, especially, I would have somebody from your affiliate co-sign it. Because that way it gets moved to amend's name and your affiliate name out there more. And again, this is something that has to be researched. What is the policy? And also, no matter what they say the policy is, what's the practice? If they say, oh, we'll accept anything from anybody, but if all you see are op-eds from people with lots of degrees after their name or lots of public experience, then maybe you ought to take that to heart and try and get somebody with name recognition to sign it. Another question: has your paper editorialized on the topic you want to write about? Has it published other opinion pieces on that same topic? And has it covered the topic extensively? This is important because if it's already editorialized on the topic, their attitude may be, what do we care? We've already taken a position on this. And if you are putting something in that's contrary, it might even be more difficult. If they've published a lot of other op-ed pieces on it, or if they've published articles on it that have covered it extensively, then they may be pretty picky about what they publish. And that comes down to the question of, and this is something you should always consider, how new or different is your piece? Because even if it has been extensively been covered by the newspaper, if it's a new or different theory, they may view it favorably. So again, this is something you have to research in advance to get a feel for what is being published and why. Another question you have to address is, why now? With a letter to the editor, it's pretty clear why you're submitting it. You're usually submitting it in direct response to something that was in the paper or another letter to the editor, or something that is clearly in the news at that time. That's why it gets published. Op-eds have a longer shelf life. And because of that, sometimes the paper's going to say to you, hey, this is a great piece. We'd love to publish it, but we've got op-eds backed up from now, for the next couple of months. Yours, we could publish anytime over the next year if we wanted to. So you've got to have a reason for saying, this is why this is particularly newsworthy now. And just one example of that, the op-ed that I wrote as a template or example op-ed for the purposes of this training, the special newsworthy reason is the anniversary of the Citizens United case. Now, here's something that can trip you up if you're not careful, so please listen carefully. Most newspapers only want to accept an op-ed if it's original and if it's being offered to them exclusively, okay? And in fact, some papers like the Mercury News, they have you sign something to that effect. You have to sign some kind of agreement with them in order to get an op-ed published. Okay, if you're writing a new piece and you're sending it in on behalf of your affiliate directly to your paper, this isn't a problem because it's new and it's going straight to the paper. Nobody else is going to send this in. All right. However, let's say you are not an affiliate member because there aren't enough people in your area, but you're a Move to Amend member and you want to send an op-ed in. That's a situation that Jenny will talk about more, where you need to let Move to Amend National know so that we don't have multiple people sending the same op-ed into the same paper. And I just mentioned a moment ago the template that's in your materials. Move to Amend will send out template letters to the editor, template op-eds. If you get one of them and Move to Amend says, please try and get this published, don't just turn around and send it in. You've got to change it somehow. You've got to make sure that, no more than one news outlet gets, anything other than something that is quasi-original. So for example, in this one that I wrote, how can you change this? Well, one thing you could do is to change some of the specific material and do a little research on your own and come up with similar information that pertains specifically to your region, to your state, or maybe to your particular members of Congress. Okay. It's more work, but you've got to do something to make that different so we don't have multiple op-eds going in that look the same. And if you do that, I would also change the beginning and ending to make it more apropos your area. A few other miscellaneous comments about op-eds. I think the first thing you have to do is figure out the information we talked about at first. How long is an op-ed in your newspaper? Can anybody write, or do you need somebody that's got some training and experience? And if so, who are you going to use? What's the editorial history on that particular issue for your paper? And what's new about your take on the issue and why now? I would want to have answers to all four of those questions before you sit down and finalize your topic. But once you do that, you can do your substantive research and your writing. But let's get something straight here. This is not a one-person job. You can split this work up, the initial research, the substantive research, and the writing. That's totally up to you, okay? I mean, I've been part of op-eds that were written, as many 3 different people contributed to it, okay? And even if one person writes it, please have a second pair of eyes look it over before you submit it. Also, personally, I find it easier to overwrite, that is, write over the limit and then edit the op-ed to get it down to the required limit. And the reason I say that is because it forces you to squeeze out unnecessary words. You want this thing to be tightly written. Also, it helps to put links to your sources. It makes it easier for the editorial editor to check your information. And it also makes it easier for readers of the e-edition to look up the information, okay? So if somebody is impressed with your writing, your argument, or the fact that, hey, all these sources actually say what the writer said, you may wind up with a new member. Also, don't assume or rely on the editorial editor to edit, okay? Ideally, you'll submit something, there will be no changes to it. And if they make any changes, then you run the risk of it changing the meaning or the accuracy. So it's to your interest to submit something that is as professional and as polished as you can make it. Now, sometimes editors will get back to you and say, gee, I like this, but I think this ought to be changed. And if they give you that feedback, great, go with it, okay? But in these days with your typical large urban newspaper, I doubt if that's going to happen. And just to give you one example, we all know that there have been significant cutbacks in the media industry, and especially with newspapers. But just to give you one example from my experience, San Jose Mercury News 10 or 20 years ago had a dozen people working in the editorial department, you know, writing and researching editorials, checking facts in op-eds, and reviewing letters to the editor. Do you know how many they have now? One. Okay. And that person covers two papers, the Mercury News, which covers the South Bay, and the, I think it's called the East Bay Times in the East San Francisco Bay Area. Okay. So they have an insane workload. So try to make it as easy as possible for them, and they will appreciate it. Just an aside, because this is not material that we were originally intending to cover. However, keep in mind, if your newspaper has not editorialized in favor of the We the People Amendment or some other bill that you are pushing on behalf of Move to Amend, you can ask for a meeting with the editorial board, and you can make your pitch with them. And you can even offer, you know, resources to them. If you've got a good relationship with your editorial board, you can even be so bold as to offer to ghostwrite it for them. But you better have a pretty good relationship with them before you make that suggestion. But you can do that if you want them to actually take an editorial position on behalf of the newspaper in favor of fill in the blank. Hopefully, it's going to be HDR 54. Again, based on my experience, I've been to 2 of these meetings, and it is almost impossible to get the whole editorial board there. The editorial board is more than just the editorial editor. So if you get the editorial editor, you're probably pretty lucky, and they will relay your request to the rest of the editorial board. Finally, if you do get an op-ed published, the same rules apply as for letters to the editor. Thank the editor, notify Move to Amend National by sending a copy of the op-ed with the publication date and the name of the publication, and send a copy to your members of Congress and anyone else you're trying to influence on this issue. You know, perhaps you're working on state legislation that is consistent with Move to Amend, as happened recently. Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, in Minnesota with the bill to outlaw foreign donations to campaigns. And in California, we're trying to do the same thing now. So if you get something published that will help influence a state legislator, by all means, send a copy to them. And then finally, and I say this because this is something that I didn't do when I first started, keep copies of all the letters to the editor that you write, all the op-eds that you write, whether they're published or not, and especially the ones that are published. Hopefully Move to Amend is now going to start keeping a record of everything that gets published after this training. But it might be nice to go back and get this material from you for future reference. Any rate, that's all I have on op-eds. I say go for it. The smaller the paper, the more of a chance you have of getting in and spreading the word. Any questions?
John, you mentioned not wanting to send in multiple publications or not wanting to send your op-ed to multiple papers and some papers or publications wanting exclusive access. We have a question in the chat from Jan that's basically the same question, but regarding letters to the editors. Do those rules still apply, or are those friendlier to sending to multiple publications? And Margaret, you might be able to answer this as well.
Margaret, you want to take a first crack at it?
Sure. First of all, especially smaller papers, a lot of papers will actually belong to the same company. So you might not be sending your letter to multiple publications, in fact. I don't really know the answer to the question. What I would suggest is send it to one. If they reject it, then send it to another. If they reject it, then send it to another. You know, go closer to home first. But I wouldn't send, you know, the exact same letter to multiple publications all at once. Because then, I mean, I think it should be obvious, you know, they'll just think, well, this person is just trying to wallpaper us. So that's what I would suggest, you know, send it to one, and I wouldn't assume that just because you send it to 4 or 5 papers, especially if they're in the same region, that they're actually different entities. And I see Mary Sue has a hand up, but John, did you have or Greg, a response to that also?
I agree with what you said. I would just like to add for op-eds is if you look at the websites, quite often it will say something like, thank you for submitting an op-ed. You know, we are completely overwhelmed. We'll try to get back to you, but if we don't get back to you within 3 to 5 business days, you can assume we're not going to use it, and therefore, you know, you're free to go try and publish it somewhere else. So that's what happens with op-eds. And I would just like to say, by submitting a letter to the editor op-ed to paper A, you may actually wind up getting published in paper A and B if they're part of the same news group. Right. So you definitely don't want to burn bridges with an outfit like that by sending in something that you know, they think is not original.
One other thing I forgot to mention, so and still see you, Mary Sue. Nowadays, with all everything being online so much, it's easy for them to keep track of this. So I looked for my local regional paper here, and I could not even find the rules for submitting a letter to the editor unless I was a subscriber. So that's something else. If it's a small, I mean, all papers are online now. So you know, try the papers that you're actually a subscriber to first. Mary Sue?
Oh, I have a different question, so make sure you're finished with that one first. Just
I think we are.
okay. Well, maybe more of a comment, but my experience with our newspapers sounds a little different, or with our editor sounds a little different than what was described. And I don't know if there's a wide variety of editors out there, but mine is, they're very accessible. I've been published, I've gotten op-eds published 3 or 4 times, I guess now, through this editor, and he always has responded with, well, if he has suggestions. So the last time I wrote on the sunshine laws in Ohio and basically how they're not being used here in Dayton, but it was fairly vague, and it was a little bit short, and so he sent it back. He said, "This is great, but you've got room for more, and be sure and put an ask in there. You know, what do you really want people to do? You can strengthen this." So he was editing for me, basically. I would also add that Deb Hogshead, although she's left now, she's an excellent editor. Anything I write, I send to her because she is just so good at finding everything, tightening things up, telling me where things go kind of off, whatever. But I guess I wanted to put that out there because if you're concerned about sending to the editor, if it seems somewhat formidable, it ain't necessarily so. You may find that the editors are very welcoming to your ideas and very happy to help you and really want us to see you succeed. The only other thing I was going to add is that with my editor, it's very much a matter of local. You know, if it doesn't clearly apply to the Miami Valley, he's not that interested. So anything that I put in, and I try to make it conversational, but also I need to immediately appeal to some local problem or local interest. That seems to be critical.
Mary Sue, excellent points. I thought I qualified what I said before to major, newspapers in major urban areas, and I'm
Are
not.
you saying Dayton's not major?
Before you interrupted me, what I was about to say is I'm not dissing Dayton. However, I strongly believe that it probably has a substantially less of a population than San Jose. Any rate, but no, you're right. And I said, and when we were talking about this privately among ourselves to get this training ready, somebody said, I think it was Margaret, she said her old newspaper where she used to live, they would publish anything, and that's not to imply that most papers will, but I mean, it depends on the size of your newspaper. But to make, these editors' lives easier, it's better to submit something that is, close to being publishable, even if it isn't 100%. I'm impressed that you have an editor that is that friendly and kindly and takes that much time. But it sounds like you've built up a relationship with him, just like Greg has built up a relationship with him. And that's another point. Build the relationship so that hopefully they will do this, or they will look friendly upon you the next time you try to submit something.
Well, we are almost out of time. Wanted to respect the hour. I did have one very, though, quick question that I'd like both of you to respond to. And it is that if people are going to submit, particularly a letter to the editor, and that goes to a specific person who is in the editorial page who deals with that, should you also send that same letter to the editor, the person responsible for doing editorials? I have done that, and I've not had sometimes things pop up in the letter section, but I've noticed, oh, that sentence was in the letter the editor I submitted in the editorial. So I'm just wondering, if you're already going to do that work, and why not prime the pump and send something to the editor as well?
I would say check with the editorial editor. My sense of my own newspaper would be that would not be looked favorably upon, because it's more work for somebody else when another person on their staff should be doing that. Margaret, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, think it's all very local. The paper where I used to live that would print anything, they would only print it if your address was in that town, because it was a weekly local paper. So they wouldn't print anything. They would print anything from someone who had an address in that town. And for tying things to local events, you could call up somebody and ask them to give you a comment about Citizens United, and then that would be a local tie-in to Citizens United. So you can be creative about that. So I think it's, it's about the relationships, as we've been saying, once they get to know you and that you're reliable and serious and thoughtful, then you can have conversations about these things.
Okay, we're going to turn now to Jenny Spanos, who's going to talk about the website, and again, reiterating the importance of connecting with us if you're going to do this.
And avoiding duplicates.
Yes.
Hi, guys. Thank you. It's so great to see you all. I'm so glad you're here and that you are going to be helping us with this first action of 2024. Citizen United really is an important date for Move to Amend, since it is what started and founded the movement to amend the Constitution to make clear corporations are not people and money's not free speech. So super glad that y'all are here. I'm going to share my screen and show you where a lot of this information can be found. It is on the website. Let me start from the beginning. It's under the Get Involved tab, Take Action Toolkit. And then if you scroll down to the Media and Communication Kit, again, Get involved, take action toolkit. There's a wealth of information here, and some more, if y'all want to dig into some more deeper reading on earning media attention and developing those relationships that Margaret and John really highlighted as being important. Here is the instructions that we were just going over here. And it just, just kind of lays it out for you more, gives you more of the thought. I know a lot of y'all have already written letters to the editor or op-eds, and some of this is just like refreshers or, hopefully some a motivator for you to do it and to take this opportunity, this golden opportunity, because when a newspaper, they're looking for something that's timely, and this is timely. Citizens United has impacted our country immensely, and y'all expressing your voices through your paper, your local papers, or any other national publications, depending on where you're going to submit your papers. I do agree that it should be different. When I was in a newsroom, we shared our newsroom with someone else, so we worked together and strategized what was going to go into the paper this week, and we worked with another newsroom, and if it was bigger than our two papers, then we'd send it to our parent company, because it was all owned, like y'all had mentioned, by the same in my case, Freedom Florida papers. We can go into that another time, but so that's really, that one thing can get passed to the other papers and get published somewhere else. But there's just some do's and don'ts here, help kind of guide your decisions. One of the things that they mention is you don't want to submit the same op-ed to many papers at the same time, get some responses to decide, use a different voice for different issues, different papers kind of have different focuses, find their focus, and submit. You can submit as much as you want or as many as you want for the Citizens United anniversary, as long as it's not in the same voice. And not that, you don't want to send a template or cookie cutter examples. So also, if you could send it to us, just so that, again, just in case somebody else is in your state that's delivering or considering submitting to that paper, we can kind of help coordinate so that that's not happening, that's not overlapping, or that they're distinctly unique enough that it really wouldn't matter, but it will show the interest in this topic and this particular anniversary and this timeliness. If you could send it to admin at Move to Amend, and then in the subject, put in all caps, attention, letter to the editor or op-ed, whatever you're doing in your city and state. So we could just make sure that those, that there's no double submissions. That has happened before. That's why we are kind of stressing that. We don't want, anyone to lose their authenticity when dealing with their particular editors or editorial boards papers. Sometimes you'll submit something and they'll pass it on to, say, a general reporter to, hey, dig more into this too, and which they may call you and do a different type of piece. So just some ideas on all of that. Let's see, we'll go back. This is where some of those drafts that they were talking about were coming in. These are just some drafts. Most of these have been published already. It has the word count. It has kind of like some ideas for you, some templates on ideas and directions to go to help generate, your own creativity, what it looks like to have a word count from a particular place. But these have been published, so you wouldn't want to republish them without, giving that credit. So your voice, that's what is going to have the power. You all have your own voice, you all have your own distinct passions, and the reason that you're doing this work, express those in your letters to the editor and your op-eds. And then here's just some more talking points to help, guide or maybe help you decide how and what you're going to focus on. Does anyone have any questions about this? Do you have any, I don't want to make you dizzy. We can turn that off.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts that you'd like to share? We did want to get this done by 8 o'clock, so we are all willing to stay and answer questions, but out of respect for your time, we wanted to keep the training to 1 hour. So I'll open the stack. Any other questions, thoughts that you have, or suggestions for each other?
I have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm looking through the things you just went through. I'm not sure I found everything, but the letters, the sample letters you had, are they on this website too, on the Move to Men website?
Yeah.
The sample
Yes.
letters?
Yeah,
Okay.
we will send a link out to
Okay,
this program, to the website, and include the general address, admin@movetomen.org, for you to send in if you have a draft. And just to clarify, those draft sample letters and op-eds have not yet been publicized anywhere, published anywhere. They are samples, but again, because they're samples, don't, highly encourage, can't say it often enough. Don't just take what's there and cut and paste and send it in,
right.
particularize it.
Well, you guys had some very up-to-date information, just facts, so that was good. So thank you for that.
Someone had mentioned that they didn't see it. I think it was Michael right here under earning media attention, the first bolding, writing letters to the editor. It's the second bullet point. And then there's other deeper dives into writing letters to the editor and editorials, working with radio. But this is, these two are the two pieces of information that we've been sharing with you thus far. And I do believe some of these actually have been printed.
Yeah, I think elsewhere some have been printed. But at least those
Yes.
two links are the links that are brand new, that were put together just for this program. So
Absolutely.
we will lift up and make sure you are directed specifically to those links on our page. So with that, if individuals want to leave, that's fine. Feel free, reach out. If you have any questions, you can email us at info@movetomen.org. But again, send in the, most of you know our individual email addresses. Do that, but if anyone wants to stick around, ask any further questions, make comments, we're here.
Thank you again for attending.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to hearing what y'all write.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye.